right, so we're live. We're going to finish up corporate culture and then talk about the meaning and value of work today. So we talked about, just sort of as a review of last time, we talked about culture and whether or not it's organic or it's top down, depending on the type of organization you have. But how do you build it? Well, it's through these mission statements, codes of ethics, and statements of value. And I think I talked about that last time. And I suggested to you that once we develop these, one of the things that you actually have to do is you actually have to work to implement them. They're not self-fulfilling prophecies. Once you create these things, these documents, they don't just spring to life. We found that when we talk about culture, and at the beginning of this discussion, we talked about culture in the broadest sense, having sort of a national identity. So I suggested to you that we could think about culture in both a macro and a micro level sense. We can talk about culture at the macro level in terms of national cultures. We have a culture as the United States. One of the things that has been a bedrock of our culture has been sort of a commitment to, even though we don't have a democracy, we have a republic, has been this at least adherence to the idea of the fact that we are a democracy. What does a democracy require at a fundamental level? Well, there are behavioral requirements for decision makers in a democracy, if you're going to have a democracy, and there are behavioral requirements for citizens. And one of the bedrock foundations of those requirements are that you accept the rules of the game as legitimate. What does that mean? Well, if you lose an election, you accept that. And you concede and you show up on Inauguration Day when every other president, this is not a political statement, this is a statement of fact. Every other president, when they have relinquished the White House, has shown up for the inauguration of the outgoing president until we get to Donald J. Trump, who refused to go to the inauguration of Joseph Robinette Biden. You know, that's a bedrock foundation. And so cultures can change over time, and corporate cultures can change over time. We're seeing a change in higher education. Historically speaking, there has been this commitment in higher education to tenure track faculty members. And I told you at one point in time, right, that we had a tenure faculty member who stabbed a student with a pencil, and I tried to fire him and I couldn't because he had tenure. I think that kind of adherence to that principle is going away in the contemporary era. And it is disruptive to what was the status quo. And so you can have these disruptions in culture as well. It's not a static thing. It's not once you establish it, it stays there forever and ever at all times. It can be disrupted. How do you ensure that this is going on? Well, you have ethics hotlines. And what do ethics hotlines, oh, got the wrong side there. There we go. What do ethics hotlines entail? The ability for people to call and make a complaint. Now, this is not without controversy. The idea of these hotlines, they are usually, and we have one here at UCO, the Board of Regents of Oklahoma Colleges, who now thinks that their name is Rousseau, even though in the Constitution of the great state of Oklahoma, it is the Board of Regents of Oklahoma Colleges. They have an ethics hotline. It's called Ethics Point, I think. And you can call and you can make a complaint about something that you think is going on that's an unethical practice here at the University of Central Oklahoma, and that is anonymous. Now, what's wrong with that? I mean, there is this balance that we have to have. And this goes to, again, one of the tenets of sort of American culture. What is that? Well, it's the idea that you give people due process. that you allow them. This is a fundamental tenet of Anglo-American jurisprudence culture. It's deeply ingrained in our psyche. And when we talk about due process, there are two types of due process. There's what we call procedural due process and substantive due process. So we have PDP and SDP. Procedural due process, and this goes to how do we monitor? So we have these ethics hotlines where you can call and make a complaint and say, for example, I don't know, that your professor is, acting unethically as it relates to grades. So you call and you file, I think you actually go online now to file ethics points. It used to be a hotline that you could call. Now it's nobody wants to actually talk on the phone. These devices are inappropriately named. We call them a phone, they're not a phone. Because nobody actually talks on them. I actually talk because I seem to spend an inordinate amount of time as vice mayor talking on the phone, screaming at people, trying to get them to do their job. But I'm the exception. How many of you have actually had a phone call in the last day? Oh, everybody in here says that they've had a phone call in the last day. Really?
I got one 30 minutes ago.
Did you answer it? I mean, a lot of the phone calls that I get are spam phone
My
calls.
best friend every morning. I talked to my
Wow.
grandma yesterday.
That's unusual. But if you went back in time, we spent a lot of time on the phone in the past. We don't. You had to call to make reservations, to do anything like that. You don't anymore. You get online, you make your reservations, you go to Open Table, whatever it is that you want to do. I mean, a number of years ago, I was listening to NPR on my way into UCO, and a innovation expert was being interviewed on NPR, and they predicted that 50% of the jobs that were in existence at that point in time would become obsolete within the next 10 years, is what they said. And I pushed back really hard, and I was in my mind, I'm thinking that can't be right. 50% of the jobs are gonna be completely obsolete in the next 10 years. And then I went to Sam's that day to get groceries for my mother's business. And it used to be that you would go to Sam's and you could have lunch at Sam's. There were all of these little ladies that were out there passing out samples of everything. They've stopped doing that. And they had replaced a lot of it with this Freos thing where you scan your membership card. And this is great, right? I mean, this is it puts somebody out of a job, and that person can get sick. They call in. The Freos is always there. And guess what? One of the things that would happen with giving out samples at Sam's, they stopped doing food samples for the most part, or they do some, but it's very limited compared to, it used to be that they would set up every day and you literally go, people would get 2 or 3 samples and literally you could make lunch out of it. You can't anymore. They've got this Freos and it dispenses 1 sample per card so that you're not getting 8 samples. And it doesn't get sick. And it doesn't require health benefits and all of the other things that are required under the Affordable Care Act, for example, for a company that's the size of Sam's and Walmart. And isn't this great? We don't have checkers are going away. That used to be when I was a kid, that was the peach job. You started out at a grocery store as a bag boy, they don't actually have these anymore. Very few grocery stores actually. I think Crest still has bag people. I guess it's, sexist now to say bag boy, but that historically it was young men that did this job, and they sacked your groceries. And not only did they sack them, they wheeled them out to your car and put them in your car for you. And they weren't allowed to accept tips, by the way. It's incredible to me what we've now gone to tipping. We tip everything, it seems like. And so there were these jobs. Those have all gone away for the most part. There are very few stores that still have sackers, is what I guess the more modern term is. There are lots of stores that have gone away from, I went into a Walmart in Texas about a year and a half ago, and there was no cashiers. Everything was self-checkout. They had a person that would check your ID if you were buying alcohol, but that was it. Or if something happened with the machine, but it was all self-checkout. Now, some of those jobs have gone on. I mean, what they've done is because they're having to compete with Amazon, which delivers it to your home. They're now doing pull your order for you, so you can just drive up and get whatever it is you need, right? So we have this vanishing of certain jobs, going back to due process and this, we used to have a person that would have manned the ethics line. Now it's you send an email to a box and it forwards it to the appropriate person, right? They have some way of saying if it comes from this or it involves this, it goes to this person who oversees the UCO ethics point. And so you can say, for example, Professor Aguirre is unfairly assigning grades in his class. He favors X group over Y group. And they'll do an investigation. Now, one of the things that we have, again, going to our culture as a nation, is that when you accuse somebody, generally, because of the safeguards of procedural due process, so procedural due process involves the way we get at these things, not the substance. So what is substantive due process? Well, this generally involves what we call fundamental rights, is substantive due process. So they're found in a legal sense, usually in the Constitution of the United States. We could come up with substantive due process rights. And in academic institutions, we do. We have something that resembles this. It's called academic freedom. What does that mean? Well, generally it means that in my classroom, what I choose to cover, because I am the subject matter expert, is not going to be questioned by somebody else. No one else wants to teach this class for some reason. I don't know why. I think this is my favorite class to teach, because this is the only class that I teach that is not vocational education. All of the sales classes, IMC, are vocational education. Those are giving you hard skills and some soft skills in order to go out and actually be able to perform your job. This is one that requires that you actually think, not that you just react to stimuli in a predictable way. So we go through sales competition. We're about to go to ICSC in, what is it? Next week. And boy, are we gonna have fun. It's in Orlando. This is my shameless plug for why you should get on the sales team. It's at a resort. And you don't have to pay for any of it to go. UCO and the competition pay for the cost of your travel and all of that to go to these competitions. So you should really consider, they didn't do this when I was in college. If you wanted to go, on a student tour or something like that, who paid for it? I did. Now, the cost of college was a lot cheaper, but this is an opportunity. But so you're going to go through the rubric, and there are just sort of ways that people respond predictably. if you don't do things like greet your customer and shake hands, which is a big thing in our culture. Not every culture shakes hands, but it's a big thing in our culture to shake hands. And we believe that you can learn a lot about a person from their handshake. That's sort of vocational education. What I do in this class requires that you think about things beyond, why is it that we do this? Is it ethical to insist on this? What about cultures? For example, if you have, and we live in a global society, if you're dealing with people who are Muslims and there are male and female interactions, that's not an acceptable practice. But as Americans, we sort of hold that against people if they don't shake hands, right? Is that ethical? So substantive due process, we have this thing called academic freedom. I can talk about all of these things in here, and you could go and complain to the dean and say he's talking about, for example, I had a student go and complain because in one of my marketing ethics courses, I brought up the topic of, marketing of abortion. And he said that was inappropriate sexual content in a marketing class. Well, abortion services are something, you pay for this, right? This is a topic that is legitimately within the sphere of the domain of a marketing ethics course. And so, there's not much the dean could say other than that's, within the scope and in marketing, because it is a pervasive social activity, almost everything is something that is touched on by marketing. I've also talked about the legal standpoint of, for example, the marketing and sale and distribution of pornographic material in this class, and how that's changed, and how the internet has changed. That has changed our culture, by the way, the internet and the wide availability. I was listening to NPR this morning, and the age at which children, for example, because of the internet, are now exposed to, sensitive kinds of topics is becoming younger and younger, because it's really hard for parents to, monitor what their kids are doing when they're better at the phone than you are. So academic freedom is this idea of substantive due process, the idea that I can talk about a whole lot of things in my class, and if you make a complaint, the procedural due process is going to tell us how we investigate that complaint. Now, this is again where ethics hotlines become problematic. We want people to be able to make complaints, but when you affect people's jobs, what kind of procedural safeguards are you going to put in place so that you don't have, for example, star chambers that are taking away their jobs because they've been accused of something? Again, a heartland of Anglo-American jurisprudence in the common law is that you are guilty or you're innocent until proven guilty, right? Not the opposite. That was not the case for most of human history. Most societies assumed guilt until you proved yourself innocent. But that's embedded deeply, and these ethics hotlines can be problematic in terms of that. Having corporate ethics officers who are actually trained and have a seat at the table, they are in the boardroom, they are in the C-suite. And then these holistic integrations of these programs so that people understand that there are values that the culture of the organization holds dear. And how you do that? Well, a lot of it's through training programs. Now, what's one of the problems with the training programs? When we talk about ethics programs, a lot of times these kinds of things are trained when you're onboarded and then never again. And that just sort of means that what? Well, it can get lost in the milieu of, the day-to-day or operations of the organization. Any questions about culture? All right, so let's talk about, I'm going to come up. It's meaning and value of work. So the difference between great jobs and meaningful jobs. When we ask people on job satisfaction surveys and why they chose, on surveys on why they chose their job. Now, these are problematic because when you ask people surveys, a lot of times they will respond in ways that they think you want to. But the stability of these questions over long periods of time suggests that there is some validity to a lot of these surveys with regarding work and the reason people choose jobs. How important do you think pay is with regard to a job? In terms of what you think, not for yourself, but what you think other people would say with regard to whether or not they chose the job. And is pay high on that or low or somewhere in the middle?
I think every generation besides this one
Uh-huh.
regards pay as more important than like corporate culture or being happy at work.
Why do you think that?
Because I don't know. I
There
feel-
is some evidence to
Yes.
support what you're saying.
I would say that people just found their jobs to be a means to an end and were not seeking like joy in their jobs and just whatever, just pays the bills and then come back and then they're home with their families or they're by themselves or whatever.
So you think it was transactional in the past, is what
Yes.
you're saying? You're
Yes.
saying that jobs were very transactional. It was a means to an end. It was something that you had to endure.
Yes.
Historically, if we went back, and it doesn't take very long, I mean, it's less than 100 years when if we go back, to the beginning of the 20th century. So, or, I guess we're in 2023, so even the middle of, the front end of the 20th century, if we went back to the 1920s, for example, there weren't necessarily the protections in place that we have today with regard to worker safety. And certainly, if you went back to 1900, there were almost none. There were just very few protections. You could work 7 days a week, people did, and then it was sort of, it became part of the culture that you had to give people a break. But we didn't have a 40-hour work week for most of human history. If you had one day off, it was Sunday, and that was to go to church. So that was your day of rest. But, again, if you went back to feudal times and you're just scraping by, peasants might go to church, but, they're out there then still trying to, make food and produce enough to live. So this is relatively modern, and I think one of the things that you're expressing is that in the past, I think, like lots of jobs were sort of involved in food production or the mass production of consumer goods. And so those were jobs that you don't necessarily find a great deal of meaning in them. It's just, you got to do it. Somebody has to pick up the trash. Now, I think I may have said this before in here. When I grade essays, I oftentimes wonder if being a trash man wouldn't be a better job.
My dream job was to be a postman, so
Was to be a post person,
I thought it'd be a great job, just to drive around and put mail
Mail,
in people, it'd be
and
so easy.
be totally on your own,
Yeah.
not have anybody looking over your shoulder, questioning what you're doing. It's just, you've got this many pieces of mail and you got to get it done. Like your route is, X number of houses and you got to get it done. In the past, being a trash man, when I was a kid growing up, was not a great job because They actually, everybody bought their own trash cans. Now, there were sort of standard sizes, but people bought their own trash cans. Some people used, aluminum, other people used plastic. And you actually had to, there were, on trash crews, there were 3 people. So the first time I was vice mayor in Guthrie, which was exactly 25 years ago, from the second time that I was elected vice mayor, we actually the city of Guthrie actually employed the trash crew. They were city employees. They're no longer, we used Waste Connections. There are a number of these companies that have been outsourced to do this. But again, going back to when I was vice mayor the first time, trash crews consisted of a 3-man crew on a truck. So there was a driver, and the prime job was obviously to be the driver because it was the least dirty. And then there were 2 people that rode, they had this little step on the back of the trash truck, and they had a handlebar that you hung on to, and the driver would go down the street, and the trash guys on the back of the truck would get off. They would actually have to pick up the cans and physically dump them, which is a dirty job because people just, they throw stuff, the bags broke. It wasn't neat. It's actually not necessarily a bad job today because most of the time, except on big trash days and things like that, the job consists of a 1-man crew on a trash truck. And the truck has, so we have these, what are called poly carts. So they're standard size now. It's not, you don't have these aluminum cans that have a lid. So the trashmen would have to get off, they would have to open the lid. You put lids on them so that the raccoons, which never worked, by the way, so that the raccoons couldn't get into them, so that the cats didn't get into them, so that you didn't have flies everywhere. And it was just a mess. People put them out behind their homes and their alleys. The trash truck would come by, these 2 guys on either side of the alley or the street, depending on where they picked it up, would jump off, and one would do one side and the other would do the other side, and they'd actually have to dump them into the truck. They would have to actually dump them into the trash truck. Now, you've got these poly carts, they're all the same, right? They're a standard size, they all have the same lid that's hinged. That was a big thing in the past when I was first vice mayor, was all of these different trash receptacles that people used, whether they were the aluminum kind or, before there was aluminum, there was steel. They had these lids that would come off and they would fall all over the place. They weren't attached. These poly carts are great, right? The lid is attached. It's on these big hinges that keep it from swinging open and staying open. They're heavy. And you have this arm that comes out from the truck, grabs the poly cart and dumps it. So all you have to do as a trash man today is drive around on an assigned route, stick out the arm, pick up the poly cart and set it back down. And the truck does it for you anymore. It's really automated. They hit the button, they get within so many feet of the can, and it sort of picks it up and does it for you. When I got my pilot's license, you actually had to fly the plane. Planes will now land themselves. On commercial airlines, the pilot, the captain, and the first officer pretty much just sit there. They're a redundant system. They don't even land the plane anymore. They're just there in case the computer fails. So this isn't a bad job necessarily. I think the trash guys who work for Waste Connections make something like $25,000 to $30,000 a year for a job. When I have to grade essays, I have to read it, I think about it, I want to cry after reading them. Maybe that's not a bad job. So there are different types of work that we can do. And in the past, most people were employed in jobs that I don't think were terribly meaningful. Or it's hard to find meaning in them. One of the versions of the text talked about Pat Tillman, who was an NFL Cardinal. And when 9/11 happened, he quit the US Army and went into the, or he quit the NFL, I'm sorry, and went into the US Army as like a private. And he got killed in combat. Why would somebody do that? Why would you give up a multi-million-dollar contract to go get shot at in a faraway war? Well, obviously, it was more than just the money,
Sense of purpose.
right? Yeah, it was a sense of purpose, an identity, and a wanting to give back. I mean, we had been attacked. Lots of people went into the military after 9/11. You all don't remember that. I remember I was teaching the day that 9/11 happened. I walked into my class. It was in the communication. At that point in time, I was not a marketing professor. I was a political scientist, and I was teaching an American National Government class. And I walked in, it was in my American National Government, we had run out of space. So this is before online was a huge deal. We had some online classes at that point, but the vast majority of people came to class. And I walked into my class at 8 o'clock in the morning in that communications building. It was in a huge lecture hall in an auditorium over there. And the first plane, as I was walking through the doors, the first plane hit one of the towers. And I walked in and I said, something just happened. I think you should all probably, this is going to be a huge news day. This is an American National Government class. So I let my class go before. I said, you need to go watch the news because this is going to be we didn't know that at that point it was a terrorist attack. It's one of those things where you remember, if you were alive, then you remember where you were and what you were doing that morning. It's, emblazoned on your mind. There are these moments. And a lot of my students decided that they were going to go down and join the military that semester. I lost in my classes something like 15 students who decided to go down and join the military. So work isn't just about necessarily a means to an end. And on these surveys of why people choose the jobs that they choose, it's not highly rated. Money is not the most highly rated thing. It comes in at about the 10th or 11th consideration. Obviously, you have to make enough money until you get to one type of worker. Who do you suppose is more motivated by money than other types of workers? Yeah. Salespeople, that's it. Yeah, that is the one exception. Salespeople have a tendency to be more motivated by money and place it higher on their reasons why they're taking a job than others. I mean, they do. It's one of these crazy things. But most people don't. So there are some different views on work. And as you suggested, the 21st century view and what you all are interested in is far different than what it was in the past. And a big portion of that is just the fact that we have the ability to have so much information at our hand, at our fingertips constantly, and to be entertained constantly. It's amazing. So I took my mother to some doctor's appointments yesterday. Used to go into doctor's offices and there would be all kinds of magazines and things like that out. They don't have those anymore. You go into a doctor's office, they have very few magazines sitting around. Why? Because everybody has one of these that they're staring into, playing whatever the latest game is that's popular on your phone, or reading, the internet, or getting on Facebook and seeing what their friends are doing. And so these views have changed, and even in the last 10 or 15 years, our ideas and what you all consider in terms of your jobs is radically different than even what I'm a Gen Xer, even what my generation thought. You all are much more willing to accept contingent work. Now, I would suggest to you that the reason that you're in this class and that you're listening to me drown on a Tuesday morning about ethics and marketing and jobs and things like that is because those of you in this class want something more than just the basic transactional, means to an end type work. But a lot of your generation are pretty satisfied with, maybe not having the ideal career and being more interested in and defining themselves differently than even my generation. So historically, particularly for men, a big portion of their identity was wrapped up in work and what they did. That's becoming less and less true. Again, and this is evidenced by the fact that we have a growing number of families in which the primary provider, in terms of an economic sense of the family, is not a man. It's now, historically, even among my generation, Gen Xers, men were expected to be the primary economic provider for their family. And there are lots and lots of people now who that is not the case. The female is the primary economic provider. And I can't tell you the number of men that I now know who they mostly stay at home with the kids. And their wife works outside the home. I have an A&P mechanic who works on my airplane, who he does it part-time. His wife is the primary provider in his family, and he mostly stays home and takes care of the kids. That would never have been the case with my parents' generation. There was a movie that came out starring Michael Keaton that's very old that most of you have probably never even heard of. It's kind of amazing to me how many of the movies that were seminal movies of my generation you all have actually seen and watched. How many of you, for example, have seen Pretty Woman? Almost all of you have seen Pretty Woman. That was a huge movie. But there was this movie with Michael Keaton called Mr. Mom. And it was about a guy who, in the corporate downsizing of the 1980s, loses his job and his wife has to go back to work. And the struggle that he has with that in terms of his identity. And that's not necessarily the case. This guy that is the A&P mechanic that works on my plane, his wife, he's pretty proud of the fact that his wife makes the money and he stays at home with the kids most of the time. That would, again, for my parents' generation, that would have been a huge sort of setback to a man's ego to have to do that or have to admit that. But that's changing. So we've got this 21st century view of work that is different even than the 20th century. So the traditional views work, the 20th, the 19th century, 20th century views work as a means to an end. You just do this as a way of getting money so that you can feed for your family. There has always been this sort of this contrast between glory and contempt. The challenge then is, from an ethical standpoint, how do you make work just, fair, and humane? Recognizing, even as good as this job may be, the trash man job, the trash collecting job, it's not, I don't know anybody who, as a child, when they go around the room and ask people what they want to be, and I don't know, they start asking you this question in, first or second grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's a question that we ask children a lot. And we start pretty early asking them what they want to be when they grow up. I have never met anybody who said, I yearn to be a trash man. Never. Now, somebody has to do that job, and somebody ends up doing that job. But I don't think that was what they dreamed of when they were in first and second grade. For my generation, what did lots of people say? Well, you wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, and that was the people wanted to make a lot of money. That was in the shallowness of the 1980s. And this is a difference between my generation and yours, in that money used to equal a lot of status. And you all don't seem to, you care less about a lot of the things that we cared about and that were creating anxiety. Most of you are not as brand conscious as my generation was. My brother had this meltdown. He lost his wallet when he was in junior high. Something happened to it, and he had it at school, and he lost it. And this is a brand that you all have, I don't even know if the brand is still around, but it was a brand called Yves Saint Laurent, which is a French brand, and his wallet was Yves Saint Laurent, and he lost it. And I went out to Walmart and just bought him another wallet. I was 16, I could drive. He couldn't. I bought him this, and he had this meltdown over, I can't have that wallet. My friends will say, Ral, there's a blue light special. Walmart used to have these special, they would run specials where they would like have a blue light that would go off, and you'd go to that part of the store and they would have like, something on sale for 30 minutes. You all don't remember this at all. He's like, my friends will say, Ral, there's a blue light special on aisle 16. You better get over there fast. I mean, he was just incensed that I would think that he would carry. And I'm like, we're not even talking about an article of clothing that you see. And he would not have that wallet. Your generation is far less brand conscious than mine is. And so we have this, this idea that how do we make work just and fair and humane, given the fact that somebody's got to pick up the trash? And your generation, you're less influenced by these ideas of we've got to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or something that has a title. Now, I would submit to those of you in this classroom, you are here because you want something more than just a job. You want something more than just a transaction. But recognizing that we still have to have these, how do we make it just and fair and humane for these people that have to do jobs that are not necessarily going to provide a great deal of meaning? Historically speaking, sales was one of those jobs that people disparaged. And we would see, and we see this, we still to this day fight this. When I talk to students about going into sales, they will say things like, I got to get a business degree because I want to get a good job, but I don't want to go into sales. And they don't recognize that almost everybody's first job is what? Sales. It's sales. Almost everybody's first job is selling something. I mean, how do you think, you think companies just exist? They have to sell something in order to stay in business. And so almost everybody's first job is sales. So how do we do this? Well, in the meaning and value of work, one of the books that we look at is called Habits of the Heart by Bella and his co-authors. And he talks about 3 different types. So we first of all have to think about what it is that we are looking at. There are sort of 3 levels of work. At the bottom is a job. This is going out and picking up the trash, right? Somebody's got to do it. In a job, the identity, and this is one of the ones that is the hardest to create some kind of humane environment, maybe, because the conditions of the work can be brutal in and of themselves. So how do we do that? Well, one of the ways that we've humanized a lot of these jobs is through technology. Again, when was a kid growing up and people had to go and pick up the trash, that was sort of a, I mean, you're covered at the end of the day in, you know, refuse. We've made this more humane through technology. The arm goes out, it picks up the poly cart, it dumps it into the back of the machine, and away you go. But there are still jobs that are grueling. We consume an enormous amount of food, right? And food production, particularly animal food production, is a challenge. So these are jobs. In the middle is a career. So a job is one in which your identity is completely, so for people who have just jobs, generally speaking, when you talk to them and when you do in-depth interviews with them, they're going to talk about other things that are what they view themselves as. Right? They're going to define themselves in terms of the activities that they do outside of work. It's being on, you know, in the past, the bowling team or the bowling league and being the champion bowler. That used to be a big thing. Again, when I was a kid growing up, there were lots of people belonged to bowling leagues. Now people go bowling, but it's not, I mean, there are very few people that still do this, like, you know, highly competitively. It's a shrinking number. It's interesting to me the number of things that have changed. People go bowling, and bowling has actually become, it used to be a very low status deal, but there are now bowling alleys that make it more high status. One of the first ones that I remember opening up to make it more of a high status deal was in Bricktown. And it was called Red Pen. I think it's been bought by Heyday. But you know, you go and rather than just having, it used to be when I was a kid growing up, you went to the bowling alley and they served pretzels with crappy cheese and hot dogs and pitchers of beer. Now you go to Red Pen or what is now Heyday, and they serve, you know, custom cocktails, and they've got all kinds of interesting hors d'oeuvres or finger food as opposed to just pretzels and popcorn and pitchers of beer. So these people in the past would define themselves in terms of things like that. I'm on a bowling league and I'm the #1 bowler. We're the championship bowling league in Guthrie. We don't even have a bowling alley in Guthrie anymore. But the entire time I was a kid growing up, and people had leagues, and they joined and they went every Wednesday night to league night, you know, or whatever night their leagues were. In the middle is a career. You have some connection. There is some connection between, and this is what most of you want, between your identity. So you want to say, I am a professional. I work for, you know, DLL, or I work for Gartner and I sell X, Y, and Z. I sell real estate. I'm a realtor. Things like that. There is a connection between. The top is a calling. It's where the activity that you perform for a living and your identity are nearly indistinguishable. This is how I view a lot of myself in terms, and it's kind of interesting as an attorney. When you become an attorney, and unless you are disbarred, you are an attorney 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. You are always subject to the rules of professional responsibility. I can't do things that normal, for example, people threaten to sue other people all the time. We are a litigious society. As an attorney, one of the things that I'm prohibited from doing is just threatening frivolous lawsuits. It's part of the code of professional responsibility. Again, not a political statement, statement of fact. Trump has largely run his business by threatening frivolous lawsuits against people in order to avoid paying them what they were owed. And he was successful at it. He was very successful at threatening people. He threatened to sue them and get them to settle with him so that he didn't have to pay them everything that they owed, that he owed them. Not a political statement, statement of fact. You can look at the number of lawsuits. I can't do that as an attorney. I'm barred from engaging in that kind of. Now, are there attorneys that do that? Yes. Can they be subject to disciplinary proceedings? Yes. It's a calling. It is who you are. There are very few of these, right? There are lots of these. There are fewer of these. There are very few of these. What are some examples of callings other than law? Well, medicine is another one. Doctors historically have viewed their profession as they're doing this as a calling. It is who they are fundamentally. They want to cure the sick. The priesthood is another one. It's another calling. The ministry. So the three learned professions. So when we talk about the value of work, there are a number of things that we can think about. Instrumental value, which is wages, benefits, things that you all need. One of the reasons that you are here again is because you want meaningful work, but you also require, and one of the things that we think about is not just the wages that you get, but you want to go to jobs where you get good health insurance. Because even in spite of the Affordable Care Act, the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States, by the way, is medical bills being put on credit cards, right? So there's these instrumental, but there are also the psychic goods: satisfaction, self-worth, achievement, self-esteem, and ultimately the flourishing life. Going back to what we talked about with Aristotle, the flourishing life or happiness, the eudaimonic. How do we achieve that? For a lot of you and the kinds of work that you're going to be doing, it's easier. Looking at things like the human fulfillment model of work. Work can allow you to develop your full potential. For me, for example, one of the things I'm always envious of is people who have talent. A lot of my family members were naturally talented. My mother is a gifted artist. She played several musical instruments, and she can paint and draw, and very, very, and she's a talented writer. She was an English teacher for a short period of time, and it's interesting to me, again, how people define them things. My mother has been an entrepreneur for 50 years of her life, but she'll still tell people, I was an English teacher. She was an English teacher for about 5 minutes of her life, and then she decided it didn't pay well enough and she needed to do something else. So she started businesses. She started her first business was she went into real estate, and she was really successful at it. But she can paint. She owned an art gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she's very. And I can't draw. I can't paint to save my soul. I try. I cannot play any musical instrument. I struggled. Tried that as well. I love karaoke. If there's a karaoke bar anywhere within a 50-mile radius, I'm there. I'm horrible at it. My friends like cringe at this idea of karaoke, but I drag them to karaoke and I make them listen to bad renditions of Elvis songs and other things that I like to sing, Black Velvet, an Atlanta Miles song. And you know, and I have a good time. They're miserable. But so how do I tell my students jokingly, sort of half jokingly, that I wanted to be a country and western superstar, but I'm a tone deaf flat baritone, so I had to become a college professor instead. I find an enormous amount of creativity in this work. I believe, you know, one of my functional fictions is that I come down here, I help you all creatively figure out what it is you want to do with your life, and then I help you get there. It's not that teachers or professors are unimportant, it's that it's our job to direct you to what it is you need to think about. But you have to do the thinking on your own. But it's creativity in inspiring you to figure out how to do that. Now with sales students, a lot of times I have a pretty easy job because they're motivated by money. And so they want to learn a lot of this stuff. I can't imagine teaching accounting. I don't know how you make that creative. But you can build character by, you know, the work that you do. But not everybody's going to have those things. So how do we do this? Well, there's a synthesis or middle view. And this is Norman Bowie's model. Recognizing that not everybody can have what I have. This is one of the greatest jobs on the planet. To be a marketing professor. Now you can't just be you cannot get a PhD in something stupid and it's still a pretty good job. But if you get a PhD in the field that I love the most, which would have been political science, you're going to make about $60,000 a year if you can get a job. You get a PhD in marketing, you're going to make about $160,000 a year, and there will be a job for you. I encourage you, if you think that this is something that you want to do, I mean, this is a great job. When I get finished with this class today, I mean, I have to be back on campus at 2 for a meeting, but I'm going to run back home and take care of my animals and meet a plumber. And I have the flexibility to do that. And if I don't want to work in the summer, I don't have to. And I still get paid. You know, I mean, it's great. And if I do work in the summer, I get paid even more. And it's all online. So I can do it from anywhere in the world. Yeah, it's a good job. But not everybody can have that, right? So what is the synthesis view? It focuses on allowing people to make free choices. Recognizing that there are people that are going to have to be, you know, but allowing them to make free choices and recognizing their autonomy and respecting that autonomy. You are vulnerable. I am vulnerable. In theory, I can be fired. It's hard to fire, as I have suggested to you. It is hard to fire a tenured professor. Now, I can guarantee you that I think today, if we had a professor stab a student with a pencil, I think they would be gone. Tenure is not that good. But it's difficult. Even 5 years ago, and I can tell you this because it came out in the paper, we had a professor who was having some mental issues. And he exposed himself in a admin business that he actually owned to some people. And we still had a hard time. He technically was not fired. We got him to retire. He was eligible for retirement. And we convinced him that he just needed to retire. But I could be fired. And I am vulnerable, right? Not as vulnerable as somebody who drives the trash truck, but work is a vulnerability. You have to rely on other people. My job could be taken away from me. And recognizing that and recognizing the power that we have over our employees is part of this liberal model, and allowing them to make free choices and have autonomy. It's also about respect and fair labor. This is one of the things that your generation is doing better at. Historically, companies under the Milton Friedman sort of model, which is maximization of profits, attempted to pay workers as little as you could get away with. Your generation and the companies that your generation is starting are more concerned with the Johnson & Johnson type model of paying fair wages to people. Companies like Tom's and Bombas, who do one for one and also offer their employees great benefits, are increasingly becoming more and more prevalent in our society. And those are companies that, as ethicists, that we should look at. I hate to admit this, because I will tell you that if you travel with me and the sales team, and I'm the coach of a team that you travel on, there are two things that I tell students. So I'm gonna actually hate to do this. There are two things I tell students that I will punch you in the throat. I won't, because I don't want to lose my job. But I say, like, I will punch you in the throat if you mention two things to me on a trip. One is Starbucks, which is a tool of the devil. And the other is Chick-fil-A, which is another tool of the devil. Starbucks and Chick-fil-A, tools that if you mention those to me on a trip, literally, like, no. Just don't mention them to me. However, having said that, in spite of the fact that Starbucks is a tool of the devil, they do provide good benefits to their employees, and they're one of the first companies that did this, that recognized that you need to do this. And by the way, it's good business to do this. Companies that focus solely on the Milton Friedman model, who believe that workers are merely cogs in a machine. The Weberian idea, so there was this German sociologist named Max Weber who said the ideal form of organization is a bureaucracy. And he said that bureaucracies, and technically I'm a bureaucrat, I work, there's a CEO at the top. They're hierarchical, so the three characteristics of a bureaucracy, according to Weber, are they're hierarchical, they're specialized, so they do one thing and they do it well. So, for example, I'm a pilot, I have to deal with the FAA. The FAA is only concerned with what as a government agency? Flying. Things that go up in the air, that's all they're concerned. Not just planes, helicopters, balloons, now drones. That's all they're concerned with. Airspace, right? They're not concerned with the qualifications of the guy who writes the prescription for your eyeglasses. So they're specialized, they're hierarchical, and they're rule bound. And then we get scientific management that gets on top of this and focuses on, let's figure out how we get this guy to shovel the most amount of coal into the furnace as fast as he can. If we're making iron, for example, at a steel mill. There's got to be an ideal weight of the shovel. Well, Starbucks is one of the ones that realized that you can treat people like cogs in a machine, where if this cog is being pulled out is because it's not working appropriately, and you just replace it. But at what cost? It's a recognition. And one of the things that Starbucks did, and I hate to admit this because tool of the devil, they did recognize that, yeah, you can find more baristas, but at what cost? It costs money to have to go out, recruit, hire, and train those people. So respecting employees' rights, respecting health and safety considerations is important. I believe that there is an exam that's due, so I will get, before you start taking the next exam, I promise I will get the essays graded so that you'll have an idea of what you did on the first exam and have an idea of where you need to go for the second exam. You'll have a week to do it, right? So I believe this is the end of the second module. If you got ducks, come see me. And
Tuesday.
No,
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Tomorrow.
let me get there. Let me get to the grade. And I got your grade, I got your ducks, by the way. All right, so you go first. Yes, ma'am.
It's so raining.
I got him.
You go home, figure it, my roommate's door, so.
No. Did you guys not consider the fact that it's raining outside?
we did, but it's like. She and I talked so much about him, but then we get more socks. We have to leave time.
Where are you guys going?
Newman, so we're still not far.